Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Pension Fund Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Melton and I will be chairing this committee. First of all, welcome to our new venue at 145 King Street. It's a slightly different setting and tone from our previous meetings, but I'm sure we'll engender some very positive discussions. A couple of words on housekeeping. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, and thank you to our team for facilitating that. By taking part, you are consenting to be recorded. Please, can I ask all officers to introduce themselves before speaking for the first time? And would everyone please use their microphones? They are turned on with the green button on the right. There are tea, coffee, and biscuits available in the staff kitchen. Very good. And the toilets are on my left-hand side. You will need your H&F security badge to get into the kitchen and other areas. If the fire alarm sounds, either continuously or intermittently, I will adjourn the meeting. Please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the staff exit, which is behind me to my right. This is my practice for if I ever get that job as an air staff. Officers will direct you to the assembly point on Riverside Gardens. Excellent. With those housekeeping points in order, let's proceed. So first, apologies for absence. I've received an apologies from Councillor Lang. Declarations of interest. Can I ask members of the committee to declare any interest on the items to be discussed today? Excellent. Minutes from our previous meeting. Did anyone have any changes to the minutes? Agreed. You've got ahead of me there, Florian. Can I ask if the meetings be agreed and seconded? Agreed. Perfect. The minutes have been agreed. Then can I move to item 4, which I'd like to invite Eleanor Dennis to introduce the item on key performance indicators.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee.
As you can see, Eleanor is joining us remotely.
This paper sets out the key performance indicators for pension administration provided for by LPPA for Q3 for the period September to December 2023. So performance has stayed consistent with Q2 with an overall KPI of 96.9% achieved. Unfortunately, as was consistent also with Q2, that 95% target wasn't met in all case types. If we look at active retirement, although it has improved, it fell short with a KPI of 92.1% achieved. However, with deferred retirements, they were able to process 95.8% of those cases on time. With processing of bereavements, that also fell short with 92% of cases processed on time. So a slight dip on that achieved in Q2 of 93.85. On a more positive note, the KPI performance for January on bereavements was at 97%. So we're hoping that that is maintained for the periods of February and March and reflected in Q4 results. Apologies, Chair, there is a typo in the transfer update. So it was slightly less. So the numbers processed in Q3 was slightly less than that processed in Q2, rather than Q1, as it's stated there. It was good performance on transfers, as 98.9% were processed on time. The second typo is with regards to the update on refunds. So apologies for that, committee. The 98.6% actually refers to performance in Q2. In Q3, it was just short of target at 95.1%. So overall, a positive overall performance by LPPA. With an increased number of cases that they processed, they were able to maintain the overall SLA. However, it's still falling short of our expectations in terms of performance on target for those key areas, which I will continue to monitor and challenge them on. I open the floor to any questions.
Thank you, Eleanor. Questions, reflections?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I suppose, Eleanor, the first thought that came to my mind when I read this report is, well, it's a shame you're not here with us, because I would actually have said thank you, and probably, thank you for your hard work. I can't barely see you, but yeah, thank you for your work, because it's been a long time we've been waiting for such numbers. We're not there on absolutely everything and for every number, and there's still a way to go. But I also remember that our co-opted members, kept our feet very close to the fire on this, and rightly so. And in the last meeting, we had said that, the letters that the chair has been working on, and especially all that you've done, would pay. And again, we're not there yet. I'm not resting on my laurels, but I did want to say to you, well done and thank you, because that's improvements for our people, so it matters a lot. On page 13 of the report, you talk about, there's a sentence that's maybe slightly truncated, but it seems to say that LPPA do, however, seem to take on board constructive feedback on areas in which they need to improve, on areas in which they need to improve. We haven't always had this feeling, have we, that dialogue was constructive and the feedback was taken. So if you've included that sentence in the report, what has changed for you in your relation with LPPA?
First of all, thank you very much for your kind words, Councillor. Much appreciated, and we'll share that with the team as well. In terms of what's changed in terms of that collaborative approach, well, LPPA have changed who's present at the client meeting. So they've changed that director to be the operations director. He's much more closely related to the actual work, and he's very responsive to queries or problems and issues that occur. So that means that I'm able to deliver more successfully, that the member feels that they're being heard and listened to, and any issues that they have are actually being resolved promptly. So it's better for myself and my team, and it's a better experience for the member. And I hope you'll see, certainly going forward, because this has only just happened in sort of January, that there will also be that change in Q4 results. So another initiative that they're actually doing is looking at our SLA performance on a weekly basis. So not waiting for us to get to the end of a month or the end of a quarter, actually providing that feedback to the team and resolution on a weekly basis. They can see where the issues are forming. You'll see outside of the meeting pack, I circulated some resolutions for those areas where they had fallen short in terms of putting in place more checkers and ensuring that the teams actually look at planning better, so that actually if they have got absences, etc., we don't get cases that fall short of the SLA simply because they weren't enough people to check the work and get it over the line. I hope that answers your question.
It did. Thank you, Ed. Oh, that's right. So loud. Thank you, Chair.
Any further? Please, Adrian.
Thank you very much. To repeat that these numbers are going in the right direction, I was particularly pleased to see the low times for picking up calls. I think that's one of the key bugbears that people have. So great to see that. On deaths in the annex, I know that there's a couple of cases with a number of days delay. And I think we can all appreciate that, deaths are probably the most complex cases that we deal with. And there's going to be any number of perfectly legitimate reasons why it takes longer to get something sorted in those circumstances. So I was wondering if, with the numbers in a better place, we are getting close to a period of time when we look at how we calculate what is good performance and what is a reasonable delay, and when that happens in terms of deaths, and whether the target we are setting ourselves at the moment actually sets us up for failure rather than success.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I think that is something that when the managing director of LPPA met with you all, is something that they're looking forward to looking at, certainly in 24-25, in terms of how they measure performance, whether those SLAs are actually realistic to achieve, and actually by just achieving them, are they actually providing the best service? Actually, would it look better to have a slightly longer SLA, but actually give a more rounded service to members? So that's certainly something that's on their agenda. In terms of the bereavement team, I've recently met the new operations manager, who is very keen on client delivery, very focused on planning the most efficient way to process the case, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, because as you rightly identified, not all bereavement cases fit in a box. They're so complex because it's people's lives. So it isn't that straightforward. But there's, as I said, the indication certainly for January's KPI is 97% of cases processed on time. So we've already seen, he came on board in Q3, that following through in terms of the indicators there. So yes, that is something that's on their agenda.
Thank you.
Any further reflections?
Yes, thank you very much. Again, from me, very helpful report and encouraging to see going in the right direction. I just wanted to ask about the areas which aren't going so well in terms of the 95% target not being met in the key areas of retirements and deaths. So have they shared with you what their plan is to actually get to meet that KPI?
Thank you, Councillor. So they've, I think I shared on outside of the packing that they are meeting on a regular basis. So in the monthly client meeting that I've had, they shared that that's something that they're taking on board. So the operations director will meet with the operation managers of the respective areas, look at the SLA performance for our pension fund and address any issues that are indicating that cases are likely to or have missed the KPI SLA. So that's what they're doing. They're also, they've put in place more robust systems in terms of their checking system. And they have changed around the teams, as I've indicated, with the bereavements team, in terms of who leads that team and what their focus is in terms of delivery. So they have shared that in the client meetings that I have with them on a monthly basis.
So do you have a sense of when we can expect that to be back on track?
I haven't had a commitment from them in terms of what that looks like in definitely Q4 or Q1 of 24-25, because there are a number of legislative demands on their time in terms of McLeod, as well as this is the first scheme year that actually the delivery of the monthly returns is being processed. So in terms of what that means in terms of engagement from all of their client employers, and then the production of the ABS on the back of that, whether that information is sufficient, whether the system can cope with producing that information required for the annual benefit statements based on receiving it in a different format. So there are lots of unknowns. We've also got the planning for the dashboard in 2025. So they won't commit to an actual hard and fast line in the sand. This is when your SLAs will be 95% across the board. What they will say is they're committed to improving them and putting in place measures, as I've just explained, that will enable them to mitigate against the chance of that happening.
Excellent. Thank you, Anna, for such a comprehensive response. And I'd like to echo colleagues' thanks for the improvements to performance so far. Can I ask colleagues to note the report? Perfect. And then if we can stay with you, Anna, on item 5, pension administration update. Thank
you, Chair. So Ellen Dennis, Head of Pensions at Hammersmith and Fulham. So this paper sets out a summary of the pension administration service delivered by LPPA and the key activities. So we've got engagement on the monthly submission reports of 95%, so that's much improved. It stayed around 55% for at least 2 quarters. So that is ramping up. They're engaging better with our employers in terms of not just chaser emails, but also engaging via telephone to help get employers over the line of actually using the system and producing the data required each month. The help desk, as we've touched on, average wait time is just over 2 minutes, so much improved to the experience of last year. We've also got the number of complaints gone down, so it was 14 at the end of Q2 Most of those are surrounding the retirement process, so that is something that they are looking to address. In terms of continuous improvement by LPPA, they are reviewing all of the correspondence that goes out to members in terms of making it more comprehensive and clearer for members to enable it to meet their expectations, because it is quite clunky and can be quite blunt. So they are looking at improving that across the board in all areas. They've also increased training for for staff to understand the member experience. So they've had a high turnover of staff last year. We know that, and they've had a lot of new staff. But often when it takes time to train those staff, but often they only look at their task in isolation. They don't have an understanding of how that fits in the bigger picture. So they've actually invested in some off-site training that gives to their staff that understanding of that member experience, how their task fits into that overall piece, to help also their staff deliver a more rounded member-focused service. On cyber security, I can confirm that they've successfully achieved their Cyber Essentials Plus accreditation for the second year running. It's a government-backed scheme to help organisations protect themselves against cyber attacks. And just to add, I will be bringing the LPPA budget for 24-25 to the next meeting. It arrived just before this meeting, so it was too late for the paper pack, but just need to give you all a heads up that is coming with increased costs. I open the floor to any questions.
Thank you, Anna. I had a particular question. You mentioned our autumn 2023 meeting that LPPA had started hosting sort of customer engagement days where you were able to meet with them alongside many of their other local authority pension administration clients. Is there a plan for that to be repeated in 2024?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Yes, they are going to, that's going to be an annual event. And I have, as you know, relationships with other LPPA funds. So yes, that is something they're going to stick with. They found it very successful, and they'll continue to hold that later this year.
I recall it was your summary of it was extremely positive when you were able to network with some of those fellow clients and understand that our experience had some parallels with others, and a bit of reassurance from those who had previous experience and seen SLAs improve over time. So I'm pleased to hear that that's going to be repeated. Colleagues, any further questions? Please, Florian.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks again for support, Eleanor. And I think, to what the Chair has just said, I remember this was sort of your idea, and you suggested building that coalition of clients. So again, to your credit on this, I had a question about point 8, which is on page 28. In this, you talk about the number of complaints you've said in your summary has gone down from 25 to 14 in Q3. And you also say that LPPA is starting to provide clearer reporting in this area. My first question was, how many complaints were new during this time? We've gone from 25 to 14, but were we at 30 at some point, or were there no new complaints? And then what is clearer reporting? What do you feel that LPPA are giving you now that they weren't before?
Thank you for your question, Councillor, on your kind words. So in terms of the complaints, they received 10 in December. They've only just started to, I think the first time I heard the number of complaints was in September in detail, and was able to discuss in detail. Before it was rather, they weren't transparent, let's put it that way. In terms of the reporting, I can now see what areas those 10 complaints that were received in December are on. So the spread, as I said, is predominantly on retirements. So it didn't reach up to 30. It was 10 new ones, of which there are 14 at the end. So 4 carried over from the previous months. The reporting, as I say, breaks down that. It tells me how many cases they closed within a particular month, how many complaints were upheld or not upheld. But there's still some work to do. So that each month they're getting better at it. And so I want to be in the position, certainly in Q4, to be able to share that reporting with the committee so they have that broader overview of the complaints and any trends there.
Thank you.
Excellent. If there are no further questions, can I ask if members note the report?
Noted.
Excellent. Moving on then to item 6, Pension Fund Consultant Review. Sian, would you mind opening this report?
Sian Cogley, Pension Fund Manager. So the Competition and Markets Authority, or CMA, requires that the pension fund establish aims and objectives for its investment consultant, ISIO. This paper provides the Pension Fund Committee with an update to these aims and objectives per these requirements. There has been a new objective since the previous review regarding the integration of ESG, environmental, social and governance factors. We believe that so far it's been excellent, but there are 2 marked as good in the 5 categories for this report, which were both in the delivery category. If we could now open to comments or questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. I actually had a very silly question is, who did this evaluation? Was it you? Who produced this?
We produced the evaluation as officers for what our perspective would be, but obviously this is now open to comment and any further elaboration from committee.
In other authorities meetings, the consultants have vacated for 2 or 3 minutes in order that members can be objective in their appraisals. So you might like to exercise that.
Thank you, if you wouldn't mind. Perfect.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the only question I have during this time period is we noticed that consultants were originally Deloitte and then became ISIO. One piece of feedback for me was that, the only thing that I knew of this was that one day the name tag changed. And I was kind of interested in knowing, has there been a price? Has that been affected? Or could there have been better communications? We also kind of found out that the previous advisor was not going to be our advisor for much longer at a meeting, which would have been good to find out maybe more in advance. So just around that, because that was over that time period, I think, which is being analysed, it's a bit strange for me. And I remember speaking to colleagues and saying, "Oh, do you know that Deloitte has become ISIO?" And they didn't know, and they actually asked me, "Have we hired new consultants? So what does that mean?" So.
Thank you, Chair. So to support your comment, officers only found out relatively late down the line about the acquisition of the Deloitte brand by ISIO. I think by the time we got to know, it was about 2.5 months old, and for whatever reason, the ISIO directors had wanted to keep it quiet until they felt was the right time to announce. So as officers, we got to know quite late. And that also applied to the departure of Kevin Humferson. But to speak in support of that transition with Andrew now on board and obviously Johnny still supporting, it's been a seamless transition, and the standards have been kept up, and we are as impressed with Andrew as we were with Kevin. So that's general support of the change.
Any further queries? Thank you, Marion.
This is more of a general comment. While measuring the performance of the investment consultant is a legal requirement, it would be best practice to also do the same for my role. Sorry, I realise I should have said Marion George, independent advisor. That's best practice with clients. They would maybe do that via a survey of members or meeting with the chair or something like that. But I think that's worth doing in the future.
Would that be possible to add to our annual review from 2024? Exceptional. Perfect. I think then I'll ask if members can note the recommendations and then we can. Oh, sorry, Michael.
Sorry, Chair, for late.
Not at all.
Injury time question. Mike Adam, co-opted member. Just a question which maybe officers know. I know that in other parts of the public sector, there's sometimes restrictions on reappointing external advisors. There's sort of term limits, particularly for auditors. Does anything like that apply for investment consultants? I know that we do periodically reappoint them and 3-year rolling contract or 4-year contract, but is there a point at which we have to look elsewhere?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It would be normal in the circumstance with the current contract that once that has expired, we would look to the market for just a refresh of what's available and put those options to the committee. There's a contract length in terms of the current contract. So once that's expired.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that it sounds like there's no fixed rule. There's no rule where you can only appoint somebody for 4 years or 8 years, and then you have to choose someone else, which I think is the case with auditors, right? Okay.
Can officers remind us for how long Deloitte, now ISEO, has been advising the fund?
Yes, the current contract I think is around 3 years old, but the relationship with Deloitte goes back to 2012, I think.
Helpful.
And ISEO is so Hammersmith is obviously an LGPS client of ISEO along with Westminster. Those are the only two that were with Deloitte since ISEO have taken over. There are maybe 3 others in their stable, so it's a small part of
interesting
the market.
Welcome, and remind me the contract expires in the current contract.
I will check the details of the contract. I'm sure. I think it's a 3-year contract with an option to extend for 1 year, and that 3 expires this year.
That's helpful. Thank you, Phil. Any further questions? Perfect. Can I ask members to note the report and then we can ask our advisors to return? Noted. Would you mind, please, inviting the 2 gentlemen back in, please? While ISEO are returning, Sian, can I invite you to introduce item 7, please?
This item is the 22-23 business plan outturn. As a point of clarification that was raised to me by Marion before the meeting, the previous business plan covered 2 years. So the 21-22 business plan also included 22-23. And that's why we see 2 items on the agenda today. The 2024-25 business plan will also include 22-23, just to make that point of clarification. So the business plan this is the second business plan presented to the Pension Fund Committee. The second was presented on the 28th of February 2022, and this report compares the outturn against the forecast made at that time and comments on each objective that was outlined. If we could now open to comments and questions.
Thank you very much. I note that on page 42 of the public pack, we have quite a bit of difference between what was expected and what we got on contract fees. And also what's a relatively small difference in cash terms, but a reasonable percentage difference in the cost of external audit. I wonder if you had any comments on that, especially given the context that maybe the speediness of our external auditors was not all that could be hoped for.
Yes, regarding the contract fees point, I think that was expected at the time that it might be higher than we'd anticipated due to the transition in-house with the LPPA from Surrey. Regarding the auditors, we believe that this will be, I believe it's due to increase again by another third, stating the level of complexity is what they, of the accounts increasing is what they determine their increase on the basis of, but we will continue to hold them accountable to that fee, given, like you say, the lateness of the accounts process that we've had from them so far. We've had some good news on the accounts today, that the 21-22 accounts are now over the line, so to speak. So that's a good update. And they believe that we should have 22-23 accounts for sign off by the end of this month, with a view to publish by March, which would be gratefully received.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And just to continue, I guess, and this is something we've seen in the audit committee as well, one of the problems with auditors and their costs is that there's not many companies that do it, and so you basically don't have a particularly well-functioning market in this area.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would echo what's just been said. I think David and I know from sitting on the audit committee that that's a problem we face, and also you had actually fed back on a consultation whereby the government was proposing to increase reporting requirements. So we've constructively said good for public transparency, but be mindful of the cost on local authorities, which is always an issue. I wanted to ask you about the report on page 43. You talk about freedom of information requests, and the comment is that all requests have been responded to, although some have fallen outside of the statutory deadline, blah, 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 and that it was never significantly delayed. So I was just wondering if you could tell us what an example of delay was for FOI requests.
So occasionally it takes a little while to reach us from the internal FOI team. There can be confusion between whether it's a treasury investment they're asking a question about or a pension fund investment. Once we have the information, sometimes we need to go and ask a partner such as the London CIV for some fund detail questions, and this is something that could take 3 to 5 days to turn around. So if it reaches us on the last day of a cycle, then it will result in a delay. I don't believe we've had any that have been delayed more than 3 working days.
Thank you. And because you have said to us before, you were trying to get information to this committee that sometimes with where there's pooling, actually, that we need to really fight to get this information. I don't know if you know this or if anyone does here, but who would be responsible if, say, we get an FOI request and actually the information is down to one of the managers at LC? Would we be liable for not having answered the FOI requests on time?
It would depend if the information was actually held by the authority. So if it's something new that we do as a courtesy, no. If it's something that we held and we're horribly inefficient, which we're not, then potentially.
Thank you. And in terms of what you mentioned, thank you for explaining the difficulty with the triage system, I suppose. Has your team had any engagement with the people who receive FOI requests? Because I know FOI requests can come from anywhere, so there isn't really a centralized point, but have we engaged with people internally to say, how can we support you in identifying where things should go?
Yes, so we have some that come in quarterly now, and even though they don't come in quarterly directly to us, we have alerted them to some certain keywords which might suggest that it should be coming to us in pensions, and that sped up the process quite significantly. I think sometimes there is also confusion between the 2 mailboxes for pensions and the pensions administration and pension fund. So we've been liaising more between those 2 areas of the team as well to make that area clearer.
That's good news. Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions? Excellent. Can I ask members to note the report?
Noted.
Thank you. And before we move on to our next item, can I just remind all attendees just to please make use of the mics and to identify yourself if you're speaking for your first time. I know it's new to us. Staying with Sian and Phil, if we can move on to item 8, and as you referenced earlier, Sian, the pension business fund business plan for 2024-2025.
So this business plan will cover 2024-25 and 2023-24. The purpose of the report is to seek approval for the business plan, which prevents strategic medium-term objectives and budget forecast across the 5 areas. Another point of clarification for this one is that Annex 1 is the same as item 8 on this agenda for the CMA review. But if someone was going to come back and refer to this pack in isolation, it would be they would need to refer to that annex rather than item 8. So if we could now open for any queries or comments.
Looks like we're being aggressively efficient this evening. If there are no questions, can I ask members to note the report?
Noted.
Perfect. Then on to item 9, which includes an exempt appendix. I believe we are awaiting Aviva representatives. However, can I ask officials to briefly introduce the item so that we're ready to move as soon as they arrive?
Thank you, Chair. So with Aviva, the general plight of the current situation with the Infrastructure Income Fund is well known. Notice was given to Aviva to disinvest from the 30th of June 2022. And as so far as we were notified, we should have received all funds to completely disinvest by 31st of December. And we were receiving reasonably optimistic notifications up to that point. Hammersmith and Fulham was one of 3 clients that chose to disinvest at the 30th of June notice period. And it just so happened in the second half of 2022, it was decided by Aviva that the whole fund should be liquidated and the proceeds distributed amongst the client base. So I think there were in the region of 12 to 15 other clients. So Hammersmith and Fulham had chosen particularly well in terms of making that decision when it did. As things have turned out, in terms of the asset list that was used to disinvest various assets in order to raise proceeds, in order to pay us off, we've received around 25% of the total amounts that we're due, in the region of, we've been paid about £5 million. So we're due another circa 15 million. And various reasons have been given for the slowness in which this process has taken place. We are assured we will receive the remainder of the balance, could be by June, July, August this year, for which I've been particularly vocal in my displeasure that I expressed to the Aviva representative, and I believe I reflected the general wish of the committee when it met before Christmas in terms of this process needs to finish, we need to move on, cut the relation and move on. And instead we're still waiting. So it was my wish that we bring the Aviva chief executive along tonight, because he's an ex head of this particular branch of investment, the infrastructure side, the real asset side, prior to becoming chief exec. He declined the invitation. Instead, we have Daryl, who's the current head of the infrastructure side, and he'll be with us shortly, along with Heather Brown, who's the CRM. They have brought some slides. I did think they were going to bring some hard copies, but they've written to me now and asked me to put those on the screen. So I'm busy compiling an email to all of the representatives in the room with those slides such that you can load them up as soon as they arrive. So you will have them on your screens. So that really summarizes where we are, Chair. It's not particularly pleasant, happy picture, but I'm sure Darryl, when he arrives, will be able to give you some extra information as to the reasons why.
Thank you, Phil, and we'll hold fire on their explanation until they arrive. However, I did have two technical questions which I was hoping you might be able to assist with Phil. The first is on the separation between our disinvestment process and the fund liquidation. Am I correct in understanding that because our decision was first, ours takes precedence over the fund? Excellent. And then second is, will Aviva be paying interest on the delayed payment?
That's a question we could ask. I've not clarified that point with Aviva, and that's a question we could definitely ask later on.
Excellent. Thank you, Phil. Please, Mike.
Phil, could you actually confirm how much the holding is? Because you said around 20. My recollection was that it might have been more like 25 to 30. I mean, if you don't have it to hand, it would just be useful to confirm that. So okay, so 5 plus 20. And I know when we were speaking informally a few weeks ago, I met you out of here, and you thought at that time that it might not actually come back until the tail end of this year. So if I remember correctly, so have they actually explained why they think they might be able to get it back to us sooner than they might originally have indicated?
Yes, in terms of the delay, it would appear that the assets that they chose to liquidate, in terms of that liquidation process, had not turned out as they envisaged. And there were other assets possibly they could have chosen instead that would have been an easier sell in the current market. Again, we can clarify that point with them. In terms of the actual notification of when they think we could get this money, it's varied. There's a bit of a grey area in the dates that they're using. I think possibly to give them some wiggle room. And again, that's a particular point we could press them in terms of asking for an exact time. But as with the experience that we've had, you can't always pin that on them.
Thank you very much, Ed. What are the levers that we have in this? Because this is obviously pretty suboptimal.
I think the main lever we have is the fact that we're an LGPS client, which is an extremely valuable prospective future customer base. And the general, I'm sure Marion will agree, as an ex-CRM of a major asset manager, when you disassociate from customers, you like to keep the relationship happy and wave a cheerful goodbye and part on good terms. So I would say that is the main lever. I don't know if you could comment further on that, Marion.
There's no doubt that asset managers view exiting clients as potential future clients, so that there is some sway there. I suspect that they may not be covering themselves in glory, so that might be a faint hope on their part. Yeah, it does appear from the papers, though, there's no legal redress. So,
for those of us who have a consulting background, this will be all beautifully familiar stuff.
Thank you, Chair. I actually wanted to open by saying how this emphasizes that we made the right decision in this committee, but we didn't make it. Well, I mean, I'm sure we're good listeners, but we made it because of each of you present in front of us. So thank you, because it looks like we've dodged a bullet there. But Phil, in the language that you use in the pack, and when I hear you speak, I seem to hear someone who doesn't have great confidence in any deadline, really. So what's your confidence level of that Q2 deadline that you mentioned in the pack?
I did try and defend them before Christmas by giving or expressing my confidence that we would get all of these funds before Christmas. And I think it was Councillor Lang that did express some doubt as to whether that might happen. And I chose to err on the side of what we'd heard from the fund manager would be sacrosanct. We could take that as an honest opinion. We would have the money. But since I've heard of this bad news since Christmas, I think we need to possibly show a united front as a committee and maybe apply some pressure to the reps when they are here.
Following that pressure, Phil, are we able to communicate with the other two funds who chose to liquidate their investments as well?
Thanks, Chair. I'd actually, so I can answer that, but I'd agree with the kind of rhetoric that it's been a good decision. So we, ISIO as a business has a handful of clients invested, so 3 or 4. Hammersmith and Fulham were one of the first movers to exit, so that's definitely a beneficial position to be in. And I think Phil's comment on as Hammersmith and Fulham submitted an exit, and then the decision to wind down the fund, they're two quite separate things, because it goes from Aviva then trying to sell 1 or 2 assets to raise some cash to pay out, to selling the whole portfolio down. And that's much more complicated and much more difficult to put them on. So that's something we should ask them about today in terms of how that's going, how's that affected the Hammersmith and Fulham decision. I personally advised one of the LGPS client in the fund, and I'm sure they'd be happy to put you in touch and to speak to them if that's something you'd like to do. They're in the wind down process, and they actually opted. At that point, there was a decision to stick with the fund and keep some of the better assets, or to wind down, and they opted to wind down. They got to the point where I think, similar as Phil was saying, they lost faith in terms of what Aviva was doing. So I'm happy to put you in touch if that's something you'd like to do.
Thank you, Andrew. My feeling is a question of whether that would be beneficial to be able to communicate with some of the other funds that are disinvesting or in part of the wind down process, to be able to understand A, their experience, and B, where we can voice shared concerns with the process or delays to the process. Peter, please.
Thank you, Chair. Peter Parkin, Co-opted member. Coming from a union's point of view, how can we protect ourselves from this type of thing happening again? And if they are going to take a significant amount of time to not give our members back their money, what are the realistic options that we can employ?
So in terms of the due diligence that was carried out when Aviva were first appointed, it was, I think, the previous year to my arrival back in maybe 2016, 2017, a significant due diligence was done. This was a very worthwhile investment proposal. With a first-class manager, with first-class investment managers, and a very, very good prospect of a investment in real assets, and with income to support the cash flow of the fund as well. I think when the first problems became apparent, that arose from the star fund manager falling out with Aviva, and then departing, taking his 4 or 5 staff with him shortly afterwards. And that was the reason, I think, that the investment process fell apart, and the problems that became or happened were as a result of those missing staff. If those staff had been in place, then all of these regulatory rules and the planning issues and the lawsuits that were suddenly piled up against the fund and the manager, possibly that wouldn't have happened. So we as officers got wind of this, brought it to the committee. I think it was in May 2022, and recommended that we get out, and we did. It was the right time. So for 3 to exit means that those 3 will hopefully get the proceeds of the disinvestment at some point this year. The others in the stable will have to wait 4 or 5 years before they get their full amount of money back. So I'm particularly proud of the advice that officers gave you, and obviously that was in conjunction with Deloitte at the time, and Kevin Humpheson's very, very good advice, and Johnny too. So lessons to be learned from the future. I think what's happened is particularly bad luck for us, that we just could not envisage that a star fund manager would fall out with his firm and depart in the way he did. With that, you can't see those things around the corner. I'll be happy to defer to Marion and Deloitte any other things we can learn.
I don't know whether Izzy want to say anything. I was going to say it's very difficult when you invest in an asset which by definition is illiquid and you are tied up for a long period of time. So I think the lessons that investors should go through are having appropriate advice and understanding the pros and cons and what the risks are. And I think you can tick that box. Understanding those risks and making a conscious decision that those are risks you're willing to take and that the reward is appropriate for those risks. And I think you tick that box. Doing the appropriate due diligence, and again, I think you did that, tick that box, and ensuring the legal side has been reviewed, and I believe you tick that box. In terms of a future thing that might happen in a similar way, I think it comes down to legals. So I think it might be, because I don't know who reviewed those for you. I presume it was the internal legal team. It might be just worth flagging to have something added on to their checklist, what happens in a similar situation. However, saying that, as an investor, you're generally in a weak negotiating position when you go into a fund to start with. So you have limited leverage in terms of changing what is generally standard documentation. So it's I think you did the right things. It just has unfortunately not worked out, but you did make the right decision to leave, because as I said earlier to Andrew, it's best to be first out the door than last. So.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Not much to add, really. I think the only thing I would say is that say if we were to get another investment opportunity, we'd advise you on the investment due diligence, and that typically covers a whole host of things. So team, business, performance, operations. And I think to Phil's point, in this case, there was an issue with the team. So the team up and left, I think then what followed, and at the point that you decided to disinvest wasn't 100% clear, but reflecting back, that was the right decision, was that there was then an issue with the business elements of things. So was the business due to stand behind and kind of push the product forward? There's a question mark over that, and it ultimately didn't bear out. So agree, there wasn't much more you can do. I guess sometimes these risks do bite, but I think from a kind of due diligence point of view, it seems like you've ticked all the boxes and covered yourself. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I just, in terms of building on Peter Parkin's point and leverage, I mean, this is a meeting that's being live streamed and will be, available to watch. Is Aviva not going to be concerned about its reputation, considering, the concerns we're raising about delay and appalling lack of clarity, interest?
Just to answer that point, we'll be moving into exempt business at that point.
But we've already, in this meeting now, over the last few minutes, raised these concerns. And
yeah, but that's for the record. But in terms of a private meeting with a fund manager, that will be exempt. But these things are general business as the pension fund. So
I'm not challenging that. I'm just asking whether, in terms of leverage, are either not concerned about are they not likely to be concerned about their reputation?
very much so.
Thank you. And the second question, I was really going back to Marion's point about legal sort of due diligence. I mean, and I'm just asking this as an open question, and I appreciate your point about standard documentation, but as part of the sort of lessons learned, is it not worth at least sort of exploring whether there can be negotiations about what happens in this kind of situation in terms of repayment and interest as part of initial due diligence?
I mean, I think yes, and I would have said, just remind me, Andrew, are the other two clients who are coming out at the same time as us, local authorities?
I think there's one local authority, one none. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I think you have some power, as it were, for the future, in that, especially, where you're doing things, for example, with the pool, you can say we are a group of local authorities and this is the standard we expect of documentation in the future. And, this is a discussion to have with your other local authorities and the pool, the CIV, that, unfortunately, we've experienced this. The learning point is to use the weight of the collective local authority pension fund group. I mean, there's 85 in the country, to say this is the sort of thing in the future we want in our documentation. You have to get that collaboration, though, I think, between you. It's quite difficult for a single authority to do that on their own.
And my last question really is, it's been really useful hearing and hearing some reassurance that really, there's very little different that could have been done, but there does seem to be a few lessons to be learned. Would it be worth having a short lessons learned paper following this, just so that we've got something for guidance in the future?
Yes, we certainly can bring a review paper that would set out these issues. But in terms of lessons learned, unless you've got a hunch about particular staff, and with firms like Aviva and any other firm on the market, we as practitioners, we do the conference circuit, we meet these people, we know them very well. And unless you've got particular concerns because you've met some of these staff before and you think, well, you've heard on the grapevine that there's an opportunity where a star manager might leave and result in difficulties. Unless you're aware of those things, and obviously if you were, you would bring them to the attention of the committee. But as Marion said, in terms of all that due diligence, there's nothing we really could have done any better. And certainly we got the decision right in terms of that recommendation to depart. So there's very little I can offer in terms of lessons learned.
I'm sure we would all reiterate the value, as we've touched on multiple times during this discussion, of up-to-date intelligence on the personnel concerned, and reiterate how grateful we are to both the internal team and advisors for making sure that that was available to us. Mike, did I see you had a further query? No? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I suppose without going into the contents of the report that ISIO proposes on the various funds that we're involved in, I suppose this shows the importance of the human aspect of investment funds, doesn't it? Where you actually monitor, who's in, who's out, etc. So that's the human element, which is so hard to predict. So that's, yeah.
Perfect. I think I understand that our Aviva representatives have arrived.
Sorry, Chair, could we, Phil Triggs did say we could produce a short paper on it. For what it's worth, I think it's useful because it's been everything's been done correctly this time, but in terms of future proofing and sort of just having that short summary, I think it would be helpful. And also building on Marion's point about thinking about possible pre-negotiations with colleagues in terms of what happens when we have to disinvest. Do you think we should ask for that?
Agreed. Certainly, as we look to reinvest the funds once we get them back.
So is that an action?
Yes, so if we prefer, we'll prepare the review paper after we've received all of the funds back as part of the new allocation positions, maybe? Would that be appropriate?
Thank you. Perfect. Can I ask members then to agree a motion to move into exempt discussion? Oh, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself, and thank you, Amrita. Before we move into exempt items and ask our Aviva colleagues to enter, can I ask Phil and Sian to very briefly introduce item 10, pension fund quarterly update, so that we can consider both within exempt. Thank you.
Yes, so the quarterly update make-up pack for the Q3, which is the quarter ended 31st of December 2023. It will be an overview of the pension fund's performance.
Okay, then. Can I ask then, do members agree to the resolution to exclude members of the public and press?
Agreed. Agreed.
Thank you very much. The meeting will now go into exempt session. I'll wait until the clerk advises that the live stream has been stopped.